To help us conclude the 2020-21 academic year, there are 3 special initiatives. One focuses on remembering. If you haven't already, please submit your images and memories from this pandemic year to university archives. It's healthy to remember the challenges and the blessings, and as a university, it's important to store your submissions for future Washingtonians. Another initiative focuses on celebrating with an all-university meal on the grounds during the week before finals. Students, faculty, and staff, I'm so grateful for you. Your extraordinary efforts and commitment have allowed Ouachita to have this fully in-person campus experience. The final initiative is the purpose of this video, a focus on lamenting. As a Christian university, we take time to lament because it's a biblical response when grief and loss become a part of our lives. As a world, as a nation, as Ouachita, as individuals, we've lost much because of COVID-19. So I pray and hope that this brief video helps you as we finish this year. You'll hear from Ouachita faculty member Dr. Nykolaishen, who will help us understand the importance of lament, drawing on his expertise from the Old Testament.
Please read with me Psalms 42, verses 1 through 4, and then 9 through 11. As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, my God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When can I go and meet with God? My tears have been my food day and night, while people say to me all day long, where is my God? These things I remember as I pour out my soul, how I used to go to the house of God under the protection of the Mighty One, with shouts of joy and praise among the festive throng. I say to God, my rock, why have you forgotten me? Why must I go about mourning, oppressed by the enemy? My bones suffer mortal agony as my foes taunt me, saying to me all day long, where is your God? Why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him, my Savior and my God.
So how's this past year been? And how are you now? I remember those first days back in March of 2020, when we just started to begin to understand a little of what the coronavirus disease was going to do to our lives. I guess my initial experience was disappointment. All our students were sent home, and our classes moved entirely online. A trip to Israel that a group of students and faculty were looking forward to was canceled. Then, as the months unfolded, while some people got bored, I had an increased workload, and it just seemed like more things went wrong and needed to be fixed. And I missed getting together with friends. Texting and Zoom were good, but not nearly as good as meeting in person. Others, of course, experienced much worse things than I did. But now, a lot of people feel as though we're turning a corner. Although there are still a lot of uncertainties ahead, many are feeling that things are getting better now. They're looking forward to getting out more, seeing more people, and doing more things in the days ahead. They're optimistic that life might get closer to something resembling normal. But for you, it might not feel that way at all. You may have suffered serious loss in this past year, relational or physical or financial, and it's still weighing you down heavily. In fact, it might feel as though life can never again be as good as it was. You'd like to feel optimistic and hopeful, but you just aren't. And a lot of us are kind of a mixed bag. We may not have experienced the worst of the pandemic, but we find that we're just anxious and tired and frustrated and a little worried, even if we're not always sure why. At times like these, the verbal and nonverbal communication we receive from other Christians can often seem to be telling us to just put on a smile. Just rejoice in the Lord and be happy. But on the inside, we find that doesn't work. Fortunately, the Bible itself gives us healthier advice. It gives us many examples of godly people who didn't just try to be happy. It shows us instead that they lamented. But even better, it shows us how they lamented, so we can follow their example. A good place to look is Psalm 13. This is one of the many lament psalms in the Old Testament. By spending a few minutes observing this short poem, we can gain some helpful insight for hard times we may go through. And just to clarify one thing, when we read it, we get the impression that the writer probably has some human enemies who are creating problems for him. You might think, that's not really your situation, so this psalm might not apply to you. But that part of it is left pretty vague. And the point seems to be more about going through hard times than about the specific source or cause of those hard times. So the principles this psalm reveals are relevant for almost any kind of burdensome experience. Psalm 13. O Lord, how long will you forget me? Forever? How long will you look the other way? How long must I struggle with anguish in my soul, with sorrow in my heart every day? How long will my enemy have the upper hand? Turn and answer me, O Lord my God. Restore the sparkle to my eyes, or I will die. Don't let my enemies gloat, saying, we have defeated him. Don't let them rejoice at my downfall. But I trust in your unfailing love. I will rejoice because you have rescued me. I will sing to the Lord because he is good to me. One of the first things we might notice is that the writer of this poem doesn't feel he has to pretend that he's happy. Not only does he tell God very directly how he's feeling, he even writes it down for other people to read. He doesn't hide his feelings from either man or God. He has anguish in his soul, sorrow in his heart, feels he's going to die, and he says so. Sorrow and pain and frustration are normal feelings to have when things happen that hurt us. God knows this. The Bible even says he has some of those feelings himself. While we may not feel confident about how other people will react to our feelings, God already knows how we feel, so there's no point trying to hide it from him. Being honest with God and ourselves about how we feel is actually an important part of dealing with it all in a healthy way. It isn't sin to feel anger or sadness. I'm going to say that again. It isn't sin to feel anger or sadness. Now, that doesn't mean we should start throwing things or hitting people, but it is good to honestly describe our negative emotions. And the biblical Psalms can even provide us with words to help us express what we're feeling. I strongly encourage you to use the Psalms to shape your conversations with God. A second thing we might notice is that the writer of this poem has been in his present difficult circumstances for some time. And that highlights another important fact about life. The hard times we go through are often not brief. When we have sorrow or pain or frustration that hangs on for longer than we think it should, it's tempting to think that something must be wrong with us. We assume this doesn't happen to normal people, especially normal Christians. But this poet has been suffering and praying for a while. Oh Lord, how long will you forget me? Forever? How long will you look the other way? How long must I struggle with anguish in my soul? How long will my enemy have the upper hand? He feels as though God might not even be listening to him. He has no clue why God isn't answering his prayer. Sometimes you'll hear people talk about some setback they've suffered, and they'll say that they know why God has allowed it to happen. And sometimes we may have a pretty good idea why God is letting some adverse event happen, and that can help us go through it. But a lot of the time, we honestly don't know why God lets specific things happen to us. Not only is it normal to go through hard times, it's even normal for those times to extend a lot longer than we want them to. And it's even normal for God to seem silent. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't take steps to try to improve our situation or seek out people who can help us go through whatever we're facing. And I'm certainly not suggesting that we should just resign ourselves to a miserable life. But honesty is the best policy. When you have no idea why God is allowing something to happen to you and he seems distant, the best thing you can say to him is that you have no idea why he is allowing it to happen to you and that he seems distant. Just tell him the truth about how you feel. But one of the most interesting things we might notice in this psalm is how it ends. But I trust in your unfailing love. I will rejoice because you have rescued me. I will sing to the Lord because he is good to me. The writer has acknowledged his inner suffering, and he's acknowledged his feeling of being ignored by God for longer than he can understand. But he acknowledges just as forcefully that God has been good to him in the past, and that he trusts that God will be good to him in the future. Essentially, he's admitting that he feels terrible now and has for some time. He hasn't heard from God, and he feels God is far away. But that's no reason to stop trusting him. God has proven to the poet that he is good, and that isn't going to change. As Christians, we could say we have even more reason to be confident about God's goodness than the writer of this psalm did. At Good Friday and Easter, we remember the death of Jesus and celebrate his resurrection. Those events enable all who trust in him to have life with him in paradise beyond this present life. The New Testament tells us to expect that Christ's followers will suffer every bit as much in this life as the faithful Israelites did in the Old Testament, if not more. But whatever we have to face, and regardless of how long we have to face it, our greatest hope is in being united with Christ for eternity. That's when we know our sorrow and sadness will be taken away. In fact, the New Testament adds another dimension to our times of lament. Both James and Peter very clearly teach that our times of suffering and hardship are times when our faith is tested and can be purified. What better test of faith could there be than to admit that we're struggling at the point of being overwhelmed with sorrow and confusion, and yet still remain determined to remember what Christ has done for us and what future awaits those whose faith is in him. If you're a follower of Christ, pain still hurts. Grief is still sad. Confusion is still complicated. But we don't have to pretend. We can and should tell God all about it, honestly. And we can refocus our attention on what really matters. And what really matters is how God will keep all his promises in his time.
Today's benediction comes from 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 6 and 7. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you.